This has got to be some of the most ridiculous nonsense I've ever heard. It says, police don't always have time to record the race of grooming gang suspects. Now, as I say, in my personal, humble view, this is complete nonsense, and I will explain why in this video, with the greatest respect to those involved, and whatever the reason is that they're coming up with that, I'm sure they have a reason, but in my view, it's nonsense, and there is no excuse, and it is no excuse. You're free to come up with your own views, of course, but that's down to you. But if you like this kind of brutal honesty and independence, I am Daniel Shensmith, the Barrister of England and Wales. I'd be really grateful if you subscribe to the channel. I'll tell you as it is, I'll tell you why I think it is that way, and you can make up your own views. But I am independent from the mainstream media. I'd be really grateful if you subscribe. I'm aiming for 1 million subscribers, so help me get there. I depend on you, the viewer. So let's have a look at this, why they say it, and why I think it's nonsense. So the headline says that they don't always have time to record the race of grooming gang suspects. National Police Chiefs Council boss Richard Fuchs admits that there are gaps in the data, but insists it's not down to cultural sensitivities. Now, as an aside, I think it probably is down to cultural sensitivities, and that's why a lot of this has been ignored for so many years. This is obviously never to encourage hate and racism of any sort, but I think that that is one of the core roots of this issue here. It says police officers don't always have the time to record the ethnicity of grooming gang suspects. He's also a director of the Child Exploitation Task Force and admitted there were gaps in the data, but insisted it's not down to cultural sensitivities. His comments come after Yvette Cooper announced on Thursday that she's going to put a £5 million support 5 initial local inquiries. So just £5 million, drop in the ocean when we're spending billions of pounds on other countries and etc. So why do I say this is complete nonsense? Well, for what it's worth, I did my stint of voluntary service with the police special constables about 28 years or so ago. I did a few years with them, and obviously you're trained nearly to the full extent of police officers, and although you do it part-time, some of them do it more than others, but we would go out and about in cars and we would do pretty much the day-to-day job of police officers, just weekends and evenings and so on. And the way we were shown to record it is exactly the way that it's recorded today. It's using the IC code. Now, some people in the comments will say IC already has the word code in it, so you can't say IC code. It's like PIN code. It's a bit weird like that. Anyway, PIN or IC. So it's an IC. So it's IC plus a number. That's all it is. So as you can see in this table here, IC1 is a white North European, male or female. That's the description. IC1, male or female. IC2, white South European. IC3, a black individual. IC4, an Asian of the Indian subcontinent. IC5, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or other Southeast Asian, so, Vietnamese, whatever. IC3, Arab or North African, and IC9, unknown, so you don't know. So IC9, unknown, you're not quite sure what to put on the form. But that's it. So for this headline, and for them to say they don't always have the time, I fundamentally disagree. If you've got the time to write anything, which you absolutely should, you've got the time to write these 3 digits, which is IC and a number. Now, as a barrister, everything we do, whether you have a phone call, we make a conference note. If you have a face-to-face conference, you have a conference note. If you attend court, you have an attendance note. They're all called attendance notes, really, but it's an attendance note on client, and it's an attendant on client, and you make a conference note of exactly what happened. Because, some months later, they come back to you and say, can you just remind me what you said about this? If you didn't make a note of it, I pretty much guarantee you don't have a perfect memory of what you said and what happened. Very often, we don't remember any of it. We call this barrister brain because we deal with so many people in so many cases, and it's similar to police officers. I'll come back to that in a moment. But it's similar to police officers in that we deal with so many cases, and they're all broadly similar, and so many clients and so many details. We can't possibly stuff it all in here all at once. But we do have that recall when we go back to a note or a file or something else, and all of the details come flooding back. But we have the conference note to record what was asked, what was advised, and what documents we had, and all of this sort of stuff. That's why we prefer to do written advice rather than conference advice, because not only do we have to produce this written conference note anyway so that we know what was discussed, but if it's a written advice, they have a full advice to refer back to later. Anyway, we digress. The point is, police officers do the same thing in their notebook, because when they get to court, police officers, there is a rule for police officers. Now, ordinarily, let's say you go to court and you're giving evidence in court and you can't remember quite what happened and you're giving your live evidence. You can, with the court's permission, refresh your memory by referring to a previous statement. But there's a test to meet for that, for ordinary individuals. And it's got to be that the note was a proper one, and that your memory was significantly better then than it was now, and therefore you meet this test to refer to your previous statement. Now, with police officers, it is sort of accepted from the off that they can refer to their pocket notebook because, again, they attend so many cases that are all the same or broadly similar. They attend a house where there's a domestic. They attend a shop where there's a robbery or shoplifting. Or they attend an RTA where, cars are involved in a collision, etc. And they all kind of blur together. So in their notebook, they will write at the very least 2 or 3 lines what happened and the date that it happened, and you shouldn't leave blanks because then you can be accused of writing things in afterwards. So ideally speaking, there should be no gaps, or draw lines through the gaps in between so that you can show that you've not added it later, you've not enhanced it later. And in that, you don't have much time, you don't have much space. So I agree with the point that there isn't often much time, but I see 3 male, I see 2 male, I see 1 male. That is a very simple reference to whom you are referring, so I don't buy that one. So that's the first thing. But one thing that really does irritate me is when people do refer back and say, well, it's definitely not due to cultural sensitivities. I think it is, with respect, because I think this is part of what the problem has been for many years. These haven't been looked into. From what I read and from the reports that I see, these things haven't been looked into properly because of cultural sensitivities. Now, this is not to stir up hate or anything else. I have friends from all sorts of background, from all over the world. You'll know my wife is Chinese. I have no qualms with anybody, but there are cultural sensitivities here. And so we need to ensure that we do look into these things, we do record these things, we do have the data, we do have the transparency, regardless of what people think. But what really irritates me is when this does creep into political arenas, and therefore these questions are evaded, and they're trying to bait people into saying things that they can go, aha, now you're trying to chalk this up as something racist or whatever. That really irritates me because I feel really bad for many communities that feel that their community is tarnished with the same brush as other people that have committed crimes and so on, and that's really unfair. But what's worse is when they try to avoid talking about which communities they come from. That just exacerbates the problem because that makes people think about it more. It's the old Streisand effect. So this is one such example. I won't play it all because it will irritate you, but this is with Sadiq Khan. And in my view, refusing to answer the question, trying to bait into coming out with words that he can then point at and say, see, this is a prejudice that you hold, and avoiding the question and avoiding the problem. Here's what he said. Take a listen to this.
I asked you this question last week and you found every which way but not to answer it. Just how many grooming gangs have we got in London?
To avoid any misunderstanding, can she define what she means by that?
Yes, if you look at what's gone on in Rotherham, where there are people taking young girls, grooming them for sex, that is what I'm talking about.
We know in London there are issues about exploitation of young people. But they're not as defined by the member in her definition of what those types of gangs are.
So are you saying we haven't got the same sort of gangs that are in Rotherham, Bradford and lots of other places in the country?
Just for you misunderstanding, what does she mean by that? You
know full well what I mean by that. It's all over the television.
And so there's the frustration. He does know full well what she's talking about and is deliberately, in my view, deliberately evading the question, deliberately obfuscating so that it is dodging the core of the issue here. And that's exactly what they wanted to talk about regarding London. So those are my thoughts on that. I don't understand why they say that the police don't have time for it, because it's 3 digits. It is literally IC and a code. Good skill, that, isn't it? Move my fingers around like that. Could do with the old Star Trek thing in all different ways. So anyway, moving on. The VAT on school fees thing, good news to a degree. The High Court has agreed to fast-track the legal challenge against Labour's VAT raid on private schools. Oddly enough, the government was fighting to get this through as quickly as possible, but at the same time delay the court process. So I find that a bit odd. They want the fees in as quickly as possible, but they want to delay the court process so that they're not challenged on it. Well, if it's such a good policy, in their view, it should be open to challenge. And therefore, if it meets that challenge, it should be good for them to prove that it's okay. I suspect that it's not. I'm yet to see the pleadings. I do want to see the pleadings for that, but I'll come back and talk about those when I see them. And on the same topic, this is right on Keir Starmer's doorstep, because one of his own constituency schools is being forced to close because of the double tax hit. Double being the employer national insurance hike and the VAT on the school fees. So the village school for girls in Camden, which is based in his constituency, was closed this summer following a decline in pupil numbers, and they're already struggling to pull students in. But as a direct result of those tax hikes, they've had to increase those termly fees by £2,600. So again, each term now £2,600 more expensive, which is adding several £1,000s per year for each student going to that school. And so as a result, they are now also set to close. When we look at success and schools doing well, what I really don't understand is Bridget Phillipson refusing to congratulate Michaela's school, despite being asked to do so specifically in the House of Commons. She just refused to congratulate the school on achieving the highest progress rate in the country 3 years in a row. And so I'd like to share with you this open letter. This is deliberately free to read on The Spectator. I'll link it below so you can read the full version. This is from Catherine Burbell Singh, headmistress of Michaela's School. It opens, "Dear Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, I'm worried your time in office will destroy the huge gains made over the last decade and a half in helping disadvantaged children across England. I don't know if you're being ideologically blind and therefore ignoring the obvious negative impact of your decisions, or perhaps you just don't understand the harm your changes will cause. I'm hoping it's the latter, and I'm writing to offer my advice and help so you might see that the road you're taking will have catastrophic consequences for the poor in this country." And it talks about cutting funding for GCSE exams, freedom over the curriculum, international tables you can see here in the world rankings under Labour government versus under the Conservative government. This is not to pick sides. These are not my figures. This is an independent source here. And Catherine here writes, "I realise the Conservatives are your opposition. To be clear, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party, nor did I vote for them in the last election. I'm a floating voter, as I believe everyone should be, but I digress." Now, I would share that view. I agree that you should be a floating voter. In other words, you should change your view depending on what they do at the time. Some people describe it as being a lifelong Labour voter or a lifelong Conservative voter. Well, I would respectfully suggest that you take a look at specifically what it is they are doing, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, and you may well change your opinion. Now, a lot of people, including some Conservative MPs, have moved to Reform. Many of you may have already considered doing that, but I would say if you are a floating voter, you can consider your options on an ongoing basis. Now, the petition, which I mentioned before, has now gone over 100,000 signatures, so that will be debated in Parliament on the 3rd of March, whether or not VAT really should be applied on private school fees. The government did respond with its bog standard nonsense response in many respects, in my personal view, but that will be debated in March. But on the subject of schools and support, Louis French MP highlights that Labour is scrapping a fund that helps schools to open sports facilities outside of school hours and during the holidays, meaning that they will close the doors to communities and disadvantaged children will have nowhere to go. And she didn't really answer the question. Listen to this.
The previous Conservative government invested over £400 million to support grassroots sports, recognising the vital contribution of sports to our communities across the country. The Minister will already be aware of our concerns over the impact of Labour's national insurance hike and the impact that their schools tax will have on community access to sporting facilities. But equally concerning is Labour's decision to quietly cut the £57 million Opening Schools Facilities programme from March.
And the response was broadly, we do support it, but at the same time cutting the funding. So those two don't really go together. They rarely do. In other news, just to follow up on what I previously said I predict that companies will come out to say, regardless of how big they are, including the biggest companies, will say, well, we're cutting jobs because of the employer national insurance hike and all the rest of it. Sure enough, BP is to cut almost 8,000 jobs, and this is to do with net zero pressures along with the employer national insurance. And so this is just really to show that exactly what we predicted would happen is happening. And I've just realised that my GAN cube is on the desk here. This is not sponsored, but since it's here, I thought you might like to check out my son's channel in the description below who teaches you how to do the cube. So check that out. Hope you like it. And in the meantime, thank you for watching.